Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Peh Aleph, nearing the end. The Mishnah mentioned that one is permitted to be in seclusion if there are two men and one woman. Rav Yudah Marav made one limitation on this, that the men have to be kisherim, not if they're perusim. And now he's going to give a second limitation on this, on the law of the Mishnah. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Lo shanu ela ba'ir, aval baderech ad shiu shelosha, shema yistarech achad mehem lehashtin, v'nimsa achad mitjachet im ha'irva. That the rule that you're allowed to have two men and one woman together is only in the city. But if they're traveling on the road, then you need three men. Why? Because one of them may have to go to the bathroom, or go on off and into the field on the side of the road. And then, if you have only two men, then will be left only one man and one woman, and that will be chud. So therefore, you need at least three people, so that if one needs to go, there'll still be two and one left. It seems that we can bring a proof from this, again from Masechet Sotah, where it says that if a man makes his wife a sotah in his local city, then he and his wife have to go up to Yerushalayim to complete the ceremony, and the local Beit Din has to provide two Talmidei Chachamim to accompany them on the way. So you have two Talmidei Chachamim plus the husband himself, and there you go, that's three. So otherwise, if two and one was enough, then you could just have the husband himself and one other person would be sufficient. Right? Generally, a man and a woman, a married couple, there's no yichud for a married couple, even when she's in nidah. But here, she's a sotah, so they're not allowed to be together until they complete the sotah ceremony and she's found innocent. They are like erva, like people that are prohibited to each other. So you see that you need three altogether, and that way, if one has to go, there'll still be two left. Isn't that a good proof? Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because it could be the reason we need two Talmidei Chachamim is so that there would be witnesses. In case he does sin, there'll be witnesses to that fact. Now that statement, those two statements were just said in the name of Rav Yehuda, in the name second generation, Amorah, in the name of his teacher Rav. So now Rav and Rav Yehuda, the teacher and student, Havu Kazle Borcha, they're walking on the way. Hava Kazla Hahi Itita Kamayhu, and in front of them there was a certain woman. Amar led Rav Yehuda, Dal Karech Mikame Gehinam. So Rav said to Rav Yehuda, pick up your feet in front of Gehinam. In other words, we don't want to be in close proximity to this woman. Oh no, that's yichud. And we don't want to avoid any problems that could lead to Gehinam. So let's pick up your feet. Let's pick up the pace and overpass her and go and be far away from her. So Rav says, hold on. Rav Yehuda says, hold on, but Master, you're the one that said that if you have kishirim, then it's okay. That was the first limitation that we saw at the end of the previous daf. And so, me and you, Rav and Rav Yehuda, wouldn't you assume that they are kisherim? What, do you think they're promiscuous people? They're not. So isn't it okay? So we have each other, and so it's not. This is not yichud. Amale mi amad b'kesherim kegon anavaat ela kegon mai kegon Rabbi Chanina bar Papi v'haberav. And I've said, well, you think kesherim means like you and me? Well, we're just so. What do you mean someone who's really kesherim, like Rabbi Chanina bar Papi and his colleagues? They were known to be very, very pious. That's the level you need, and even me and you don't. So where does that leave us? I'm assuming that most people today are not at the level of Rav and Rav Yehuda. So what does this mean for the law of the Mishnah? There's two ways to understand it. Rambam takes the story literally and says, yes, in fact, even if someone is as righteous as Rav Yehuda, not good enough. You have to be as pious in Kishirim as Bichanina. Since that doesn't apply to pretty much anyone, therefore Rambam says one woman is not allowed to be even with many men, even two or more. Is not permitted. You need to have, a married couple there, or 3 and 3 or more. That's Rambam. However, most Rishonim say that Rav and Rav Yehuda were acting in midat chasidut. From the letter of the law, they are kishirim, and therefore they could have stayed in close proximity to this woman, and they would have been made sure that with each other that they had no problem. But as midat chasidut, they didn't want to become near, and so they went the extra mile. Literally, they went the extra mile ahead in order not to be in any close proximity at all. Amar Rav, Malkin al Yichud ve'en osrin al Yichud. Rav says if someone is in Yichud, then they deserve lashes for violating this law. However, we will not prohibit a woman to her husband if she has Yichud. Let's say he's a Kohen. So we're not going to say, well, if you had Yichud and you must have sinned, you can't be with your husband. No. Even though one gets Malkut for the act of Yichud itself, but we don't prohibit her to Kohen. Amarav Asher lo maran ela beichud penuya aval beichud de'eshetish la shelo tehem mosi la'az al baneha. And Rav Asher said, when do we give lashes to someone who had yichud? Only if she is single. But if a woman is married, we do not, because we don't want we don't want to start rumors about their children. If a woman who's married with children goes and has yichud, and we give her lashes, even though we're giving her lashes only just for the yichud, we're not claiming that she actually sinned, but people will see and say, oh, did you hear she got lashes, and they're not going to know that's only for yichud. They're going to think that she got lashes because she actually sinned and she committed adultery, and therefore they're going to say, well, her children, are they really hers? Are they mamzerim? And so we don't want to leave open the possibility of starting such rumors, and therefore lashes will only be given to a single woman. Mor Zutra said, I can't have a way to get around this problem. He would give lashes to someone even who was even to a married woman, and the guy who was with the married woman, and he would announce, listen, this lashes is not for adultery, it's only for yichud, right? Nothing wrong with the kids. That's what he would announce, so everybody would know. Amar le Rav Nachman mi parahatia le Rav Asher mor namelik v'lichriz. So Rav Nachman from Parahatia said to Rav Asher is the one that says we don't give lashes in the case where she's married. So he says, why don't you do the same thing? He tells Rav Asher and whip them, but make an announcement. This is because you know what happens. People hear about the lashes, but they don't hear about the announcement. They conveniently forget about that. This makes the news. Oh, did you hear this person gave lashes? And so they're only going to know that and not hear the announcement, and then they're going to assume that this person committed adultery, and then they're going to say that the kids are mamzerim. Amar Rav Malkin alo tova hashemua shenemar al banai ki lo tova hashemua. Rav says that a Beit Din can give lashes to someone on some bad rumor, right? Even if it's not technically one of the things above, they hear some bad rumors, give him lashes, make sure he stops this behavior. As it says, this is regarding Eli to his sons. His sons did all kinds of terrible things, and so Eli rebuked them and says, "Do stop doing that, my sons. I hear a bad report." So not that he had absolute proof or brought to Beit Din, but he hears bad reports. They're credible reports of what they're doing to the woman that came to bring sacrifices, and so he said, "Stop doing that." So therefore, Rav says it's appropriate to reproach and punish people for such reports. Mozutra motibla af sera al katfe umakrele al banai. Mozutra, if he heard some negative reports about someone, he would take a bridle of a donkey. This is a shame punishment, right? You take this donkey's thing that you normally put on an animal, and you put it on the person like you're acting like an animal, and give him lashes and said, "Stop doing that. I'm hearing bad reports about you," and hopefully that will stop it. Amar Rabba, Ba'ala ba'ir en choshishin mishum yichud. Now some limitations on yichud. If a woman's husband is in town, then we don't worry about yichud because he's there, and so he may come home, he may enter wherever she is at any moment, and therefore therefore she's not going to sin. Amar Rav Yosef, Petach patur l'shut rabim en choshin mishum yichud. Also, if you have a man and a woman in some house, but the door is open to the public thoroughfare, then you don't have to worry about yichud because people may come in or out at any time, and so the couple and the people inside, the man and woman inside, are not going to sin because they're afraid that they'll be caught. So Rav Bevai, he went and was staying at the home of Rav Yosef. After he ate his dinner, the host, Rav Yosef, said take away the ladder from under Bevai. Bevai was sleeping on the upper story in the attic, whereas the rest of the family, he and his wife, were downstairs. And so after he went up, they said, take away the ladder so he can't come back down, and therefore will not have yichud with his wife. Now we ask, wait a second, Rav Yosef was home. Even if he was going out to buy something, to go to Bet Midrash, whatever, still he's in town. So it would not be a problem of yichud. You have Bevai in the house, you have Rav Yosef's wife's in the house, but the husband is in town, so it should be okay. Why do they have to take away the ladder? Bevai is different because he was friends with Rav Yosef's wife. For whatever reason, maybe they were friends from before, and so they were familiar. She was familiar with him, and so if there's familiarity there, and therefore more reason that they may come to sin, then it's better to be extra careful. And even though he's in town, still not be in yichud. Rav Kahana, anashim bachutz v'nashim, amar Rav Kahana, anashim bachutz v'nashim b'bifnim en chosheshim mishum yichud, anashim b'bifnim v'nashim bachutz chosheshim mishum yichud. Rav Kahana, also you have two rooms, an inner room and an outer room. The inner room has no exit except through the outer room, and so you can have men and women in each room. So if you have the men in the outside room and the women in the inside room, there's no problem of yichud, because the men are not going to go into the women's room. If they do, someone will see us and says, why are you going into the women's room? There's no reason to go into the inner room. If you need to leave, you could just leave. And so there's no problem of yichud there. But the other way around, if the men are in the inner room, then we're afraid that one of the men in the inner room are going to say, okay, see you later, I'm going to leave. Well, he has to leave through the outer room where the women are. But then he's just going to, instead of leaving, he's going to stay there and sit with the women, and that will be yichud, one man with many women. And so that will be a problem. So if you have two rooms and you're having some kind of a party or whatever, so make sure that the men are in the outer room and the women are in the inner room. But there's a baraita that teaches the opposite. According to this, if the men are in the outside room and the women are in the inside room, then we're afraid that one of the men might sneak out of the men's area and go into the women's area without being noticed into the inner room, and so that's a problem. However, the other way around, if the men are in the inside room, then and they want to go out, we're not afraid that they're going to stay in the outside room with the woman, because at any moment any man can come in or out and see him there. He says, "What are you doing here? Get out of here!" And so this is similar to the husband in town, or the open door. As long as people are going in and out, that is not yichud. So that's the opposite logic of Rav Kahana. Abaye says, since we have Rav Kahana saying don't do it this way, and the Braita said don't do it the opposite way, we're going to be machmir in both cases, and therefore not have the men inside or women on the inside room, but rather have just separate rooms with separate exits. Abaye dayer gulfe rava dayer kane amarabin sakba deshata rigla. And so apropos to that, Abaye, when there were men and women in the same area, he would put pitchers in between so that nobody could cross. If they try to cross, then they'll knock over a pitcher and then that'll make noise. Rava would put rows of reeds as a mechitza. And Abin said the worst time of the year you have to be most careful is during the holiday. During the holiday, lots of people come, men and women, and they all come to Beit Knesset, or they'll come to a joyous lunch or a party, and then you have a lot of mixing, and so one has to be very careful, especially on the holidays. Now we have a series of stories about even great rabbis who were tested. So there were some captive women who were redeemed, and in the meantime, they couldn't get home that day. On the way, they had to stop in Nehar De'ah, and they were brought to the house of Rav Amram, the Hasid, to stay there overnight. Ishkulu darga mikamaihu. So they removed the ladder before them. In other words, these captive women, they slept on the second floor of Rav Amram's house. Rav Amram would sleep on the first floor, and they removed the ladder so that Rav Amram and none of the men that were on the first floor would be able to climb up, and that way there wouldn't be any problem of yichud. However, sometime in the night, one of them was passing by some kind of skylight, and Rav Amram caught a glimpse, right, a little like a shadow or a silhouette of one of the women was seen from below. Shekaleh Rav Amram ledarga de la havu yechalin be'asara midleye dalya lechudeh salik ve'azil. And Rav Amram, he became overcome with desire. He grabbed a ladder, this ladder that took 10 men, and even 10 men could not lift it. It was so heavy. He lifted it on his own, and he started climbing up the ladder to go up to the women's section. He was halfway up, and he stopped himself. He straightened his legs, and Rema Kala, and he started shouting, Nura be Amram. There's a fire in Rav Amram's house. There was not a literal fire in his house, but there was a figurative fire in his body, and so he knew that he for a split second he was able to control himself and come to his senses, but he knew that in another second he might be overcome with desire again. And so he took the opportunity at that moment to call for help, literally, and by saying, fire, fire, then people would run in. Atu Rabbanan, and the other rabbis in fact did run to his house. Amrule kisiftinan, and they said, you have embarrassed us. First of all, you embarrassed yourself, right? Look at you, this great rabbi called a chassid, and now you're halfway up the ladder to sin with a woman, and you represent the rabbis, and people are going to say, look at all the rabbis, look how they act. And so you caused us embarrassment. And Rav Amram says, better that you be ashamed in Rav Amram's house in this world and not be ashamed of him in the world to come, right? I'd rather be ashamed, caused the shame to myself. Look, until today, we're still talking about this story about Rav Amram, but in fact, this doesn't show his degradation, but his high quality, that even though for that moment he was overcome with desire, he was able to stay himself and call for help, and so he'd rather have this embarrassing tale told about him rather than in the world to come. So he took an oath that the Yetzer Hara should leave him, right? Because now you see he was able to overcome it. So he said, Yetzer Hara, get out of here. And it did leave, and its image was a pillar of fire. And he said, Abraham said to the Yetzer Hara, look, I'm only flesh, and you are fire, yet I can overcome you. So you see, I think the story is showing the importance of the laws of Yichud. A person, even someone great like Rav Amram Hasidah, should not say, I'm above sin, I won't have a problem, I could be in a close proximity in Yichud with the woman, and I'll have no problem. No one can be above suspicion, and therefore, in this case, they did take measures, and they removed the ladder, and even so, you see how Rav Amram only at the last minute was able to save himself. And now other sages, Rabbi Meir, he would make fun of sinners. He said, look at those people that sin, I'm above it. And one day Satan appeared to him as a woman. Satan could take forms, and was on the other side of a river. There was no ferry, but there was this little rickety rope bridge, and Rav Amram grabbed hold and was crossing over the river in order to run after and sin with that what he thought was a woman. He said, look, I'm only flesh, and when he got to halfway across the bridge, the Yetzer Hara left him alone. It turned back and said, and revealed itself to be not a real woman, but a Yetzer Hara. And it says, if not, that in heaven they proclaimed about you, be careful about Rabbi Meir and his Torah. In other words, don't make him sin. I would have treated your life like 2 cents, like nothing, right? So your Torah saved you. Up in heaven, they said, we don't want Rabbi Meir to fall. But the Yetzer Hara is teaching him a lesson. No one should say, I'm above suspicion, that I would never sin, it wouldn't happen to me. Even the great Rabbi Meir, you see how he could be overcome by desire, and was only saved at the last minute. Even Rabbi Akiva, we're going up in generation. Rabbi Meir was a student of Rabbi Akiva. So we're saying like, look, even more and more. Rabbi Akiva, the greatest Gadol Hador, he too would ridicule transgressors. Haha, look at those people that can't control themselves. That would never happen to me. I can overcome my passion. And one day, Yetzer Hara appeared as a woman on top of a palm tree. He grabbed hold of the palm tree and started climbing up. Once Rabbi Akiva got halfway up, the Yetzer Hara released him. And the Yetzer Hara now turned back into whatever other form, revealed himself not to be a real woman, and said, if not, that in heaven they decreed, be careful of Rabbi Akiva and his Torah, right? Don't mess with them. Mess with them a little bit, but not a lot. Don't let him actually sin. I would have considered your life 2 sins. I would have let you go all the way up and sin and brought upon you punishment. So he's just teaching him a lesson, right? Don't say this again and think that you are above suspicion. Pelimo is the name of a Tanah. He's only mentioned a few times, but he is mentioned in halachic context with other Tanaim. And so he used to say every day, an arrow in the eye of Satan, meaning I have overcome Satan. I don't feel any temptation to sin. I'm a perfect person. Again, don't open your mouth to Satan. No one should ever be haughty in this way. So Pelimo is also going to learn his lesson. It was Erev Yom Kippur when everybody eats their seudat mafseket. This time, the Yetzer Hara took on the form of a poor person that may be even more dangerous than taking on the form of a woman. So while everybody's inside eating the last meal before the fast, this poor person comes and knocks on the door, and they give him a piece of bread. Right? So that seems like a very nice thing to do. They don't just shut the door and say, don't open it, nobody home. Oh, they give a piece of bread. So the beggar, Yetzer Hara beggar, says, on a day like today, right, Erev Yom Kippur, everybody is inside and I should be outside, right? He's like looking into the door. He sees everybody, the whole family, and around the table with a beautiful spread and having a nice time, and I should be outside. So they said, okay, fine. They said, come in. And they gave him some bread in the house. So they put him on the side table and on the side of the room. And then the beggar said, right, who says beggars can't be choosers? This beggar is insistent. And he said, a day like today, everybody is at the table and I am by myself, right? Everybody's, they're lying on Pesach, right? Everybody's lying on their sides and have tables all around, and he's on the outskirts. All right, I should be all by myself and everybody else at the table. They said, okay, fine. Come and sit at the table with us. So now he's sitting and he's covered with boils and pus. And he's doing repulsive things. He's scratching and pinching and popping these boils, and he's just being disgusting at the table, and everybody's trying to eat and enjoy their meal. Now this poor beggar, he's not well, and maybe he needs some medical attention, maybe he needs a bath, maybe he needs someone to take care of him. But you could understand the people at the table, they want to have a nice meal, and now this beggar who insists on coming in and sitting at the table, and now is all doing these disgusting things. So Amar le Tib Shapir, they said, sit properly, stop, this is a nice table, be polite. Stop doing these gross things in front of us. Amar le havuli kasa. So now the beggar says, give me a cup. He sees everybody's drinking wine. All right, I want a cup too. Yabule kasa, so they give him a cup of wine. Ichmar sheda be'kichu naharu be. And so he starts coughing up phlegm and spitting it into the cup, even more disgusting. And so they all get angry at him. All right, say, that's disgusting, stop that. And they make him feel bad. Shaka umit, and he sank down, the beggar, and he died. Rather than seeing that he's in trouble, and he's sick, they berate him, and he dies. Shamud abu kamre pelimo katal gavra. And so now the word gets out, and there's a rumor that's spreading. Pelimo has killed a man. Pelimo katal gavra. Pelimo has killed someone. And so Pelimo is all embarrassed, right? And so they're trying to have a proper meal, but they're not. And these are good people. Pelimo and his family. This is more than most people would do, to give him bread and even invite him in, put him at the table, even give him a cup. And so they're going above and beyond the standard that most people would do. Nevertheless, you see, they're not proactive, not treating him like an actual brother. If your own biological brother would come and he's down and out and he needs help and he looks sick, and you'd come and you'd run over and give him anything he needs. But here, they're thinking about their own perfect religiosity and piety, and they're sitting around a table, they're doing everything right. The Pelimo says, look, I'm perfect, Satan could never get me. And so they're not going above and beyond, and look, they let this poor guy die. So Pelimo feels very scared and remorseful and embarrassed. Arak v'tasha nafshe bebet hakiseh, and he runs into the outhouse. Bet hakiseh is not like a bathroom that we have, but an outhouse. A disgusting, smelly place. And so you see, like, the roles are reversed. And now, instead of Pelimo being inside the nice house and the beggar outside, now Pelimo is in the gross place, the Yetzer Hara place, in the Bet HaKiseh. Azil Batre, and now the beggar, even though we thought he was dead, he manages to get himself up. He's Yetzer Hara after all, not a real beggar. And he goes and follows Pelimo to the bathhouse, to the outhouse. Nafal Kameh, and he falls again, and dies again in front of him. Pelimo can't get away from this terrible figure. And then when Yetzer Hara saw that Pelimo was suffering, was really upset, so he revealed himself to him and says, actually, I am Yetzer Hara. And just imagine the scene, and by this time, everybody's in Bet Knesset, and they're already praying, saying Kal Nidreh, thinking about the Kohen who's in the Kodesh Kodashim, and he, Pelimo, who's so righteous, self-righteous, you might say, is also in the inner room, but this one is the Bet Kiseh, and now the beggar falls in front of him, and so he's really suffering, and so Yetzer Hara says, it's actually me, this was a test. Amar le maita amar martachi. And Yetzer Hara says, why did you say an arrow in the eye of Satan? Why would you tempt Satan and think that you're so great, so pious, above any possibility of sin? The Pelimo is saying, well, what should I say? I thought I was saying something good. I'm trying to be confident that I could go and overcome sin. How should I say it? Rather, you should say, may Hashem rebuke Satan. You should say as a prayer, Hashem should help me overcome Satan. Right? And everybody needs help. No one should be so overconfident and self-righteous that they think that, I'm above any suspicion. So here, this is the one case in the series that's not about temptation for a woman, but rather here he appears as a beggar. And here, he really actually goes through with the whole test, and Pelimo does not succeed in the test and learns his lesson finally. Okay, one last story in the series. Rabbi Chaya bar Asher hava ragil kol idan dehava nafal le'apeh hava amar harachaman yisilenu miyetzer hara. Rabbi Chaya bar Asher, he would every day when he would say Tachanun, fall on his face to say Tachanun, he would include in his prayers, may the merciful one, may Hashem save me from Yesed Hara. From Yesed Hara meaning a temptation for women. So you see that he's following the proper advice. That's what the Yesed Hara said, right? You shouldn't say, I would never sin. You should say, Hashem should save me from sin. So one day his wife overheard him praying and heard him say this prayer, "May Hashem save me from Yetzer Hara," and she was thought this was very curious because she said to herself, "It's been many years since he was with me. He's been separated from me." So his wife figures, of course, Rabbi Chaya is a great rabbi and he knows that there's a mitzvah of ona, mitzvah to be with his wife on a regular basis, and he has not done that. He's separated himself from me. I thought, the wife says, that he just can't, is too elderly and has no desire, has no passion, and that's why he's not with me. And now I hear him praying, right, Hashem, please save me from desire for women, as if he's being tested, he's overcome with desire, that he has to go and pray for it, then why is he separating from me? Right? As we're going to see, Rabbi Chaya was acting in an ascetic way. There were lots of ascetics back then. The Dead Sea sectarians were one of them, and many other groups, that they would eschew all physical things, any luxurious food, drink, even nice clothes, or relations with women. They would separate from women altogether. So Rabbi Chaya, you see, is being overly pious, even beyond the halacha, or even you could say against the halacha of ona. So his wife is, really curious about this. Like, what's with my husband? Why is he praying like this if he hasn't been with me for many years? So one day, Rabbi Chaya was studying in the garden, and she got dressed up, really, really nice, and she started walking past him this way and that way, and he's deep in the studies, but he, from his peripheral vision, he sees her this way, and then again, Amarla Manat. So Rabbi Chaya says, "Who are you?" Amara, and he didn't recognize his own wife because she's all dressed up. Amara Hana Haruta dehadre miyoma. Says, "I am Haruta, a well-known zona, and I just came today. Right? I'm here only today." Haruta might also mean Harut, like freedom or loose, and some or a name of a well-known zona. Teba'a, and Rabbi Chaya went and he proposed to have relations with her. Amra le aiteni hale lehachru mana deresh susita. And this Haruta, which is actually his wife, said, "No, you have to get me that pomegranate from on top of the tree, and only then I will be with you." Shevar azal atye nihale. And suddenly he leapt up, and you have to imagine this, elderly rabbi who could barely stand up, barely walk. He leaps up, and he climbs up the tree, and he brings it to her, and we can assume that then they had relations. Kiata lebete havaka shagra debitu tanura. Now, she in the meantime goes back into the house, changes back into regular clothes, and now he comes home, and in the meantime, his wife was lighting the fire to cook something. So she's in the middle of lighting the fire. Salik v'kar yate begaveh. And he comes home and he goes straight into the oven. He just puts himself, they probably have some kind of big oven, and he just goes and sits right in the oven. Amrale, my hai. The wife says, "What are you doing? Why are you sitting in the oven?" Amar la hachi v'achi hava maaseh. He says, "This is what happened. I am so embarrassed. I deserve to die." Right? There was this zona in the garden. I sinned with her. Right? That's it. Just light the fire and you can cook me dinner. Literally cook me, right, as dinner. Amra le ana havai. And now the wife reveals herself. So this is parallel to the ones before, but instead of Yetzer Hara revealing itself, here the wife herself says, "Actually, it was me. You didn't sin. You just slept with your wife," which is totally good. La ashkach ba ad dehava le simane. And he did not pay attention to her. He didn't believe her until she brought the sign. She says, "Look here, here's the pomegranate that you got. Sounds like Yudan Tamar, right? Here's the sign. It was actually me." Amar la ana mihali sura ikaveni. Rabbi Chaya, however, would not be pacified. He says, "Yeah, but I didn't know that, and I had in mind to sin. And so even though in reality it was not actually an act of a sin, but I thought it was." So he still was upset. and remorseful. Kol yamav shel oto sadik haya mit'aneh ad shemet be'ota mita. There's some versions that say he just stayed in the oven and died that way, but in this version it said that this Sadiq would fast all the time until he died of that misery, so he could not overcome. And so this story is a kind of a counter to the previous stories. The previous stories were that nobody should be think of himself as above any suspicion and no possibility of them having any sin or desire. Was the previous ones. You should be careful. No one should say an arrow in the eye or make fun of sinners. But this is the opposite. A person shouldn't go to the opposite extreme and not engage in relations, even permitted relations with his wife, and just separate totally and be an ascetic. That's also not good, because you see here how by going to the opposite extreme, the second there's some temptation, he's so overcome and he can't control himself, and he doesn't sin, but he thinks he did, and so that's the opposite extreme is also not good. And so the rabbis wanted people to use their physical desires and passions, but direct it towards that which is permitted. And use it for good, and make kadosh those things that are normally chol, but never be so haughty and self-righteous as to say, oh, I can handle this on my own, but rather be humble and pray Hashem should save me from sin, and hopefully through that middle path a person can go through life using their desires for good. We now follow up on the question brought in the previous story about Rabbi Chiya, who thought he was sinning, even though he wasn't actually sinning. He actually had relations with his wife, but he thought that it was not his wife. So in general, does one need to atone for sin, for doing something that is not actually a sin, even though one thinks it is a sin? So here's a couple of sources about that. Ditanya. Isha haferam v'Hashem yislach la. B'ma katuv medaber be'isha shenadra benazir v'shama ba'ala ve'hefer la. In the context of a man who has a right to annul the vows of his wife, it says that Isha, her husband, can annul them, and God will forgive her. Well, what is it talking about? Why would God need to forgive her if the husband already annulled her vow? What did she violate? So the answer in the Midrash is, for example, a woman who makes a vow to be a Nazir, and the husband hears about that and he annuls it, but she didn't know that he annulled it. So, but from her perspective, she thinks that she is a Nazirah. And even though she thinks she's a Nazirah, she is violating that proposed Nazirut, and she is drinking wine, and she's becoming Tameh Lamet, which is not allowed if she were a Nazir. Now, in fact, she's not actually doing anything wrong, but she thinks, from her perspective, she thinks she's Nazirah and just doesn't care about it. So it's this example where the pasuk says, even though the husband annulled her Nazirut vow, still it requires atonement, because if someone thinks that they're doing something wrong and does it anyway, even though they're really not, that intention does require kapara, and that would explain Rabbi Chiya why he felt so remorseful and that he needed to atone for the sin that he thought that he did. More along the same lines, Rabbi Akiba ki hava mateh lahai pesuka hava bache amar uma mi shenitkaven lachol basar chazir ve'ala biyado basar taleh amra Torah silicha kapara slicha mi shenitkaven lachol basar chazir ve'ala biyado basar chazir alachat kama vechama. Rabbi Akiva, when he got to this very same pasuk that we just mentioned, he would cry, because he said, if someone who intends to eat non-kosher pig meat, and in the end he dips his fork in, and sure enough it's a kosher sheep meat that comes up, but he thinks that it's not kosher, and there the Torah says you require kapara. So all the more so, someone who intends to eat pig and actually does eat pig, all the more so. In other words, he would cry because look how strict one has to be. It's not only when one actually sins, but even if someone has intention to sin and they don't in the end, even so requires atonement. And similarly, the other way around, this is a pasuk regarding asham talui, asham that one brings when one does something and is not sure if it was permitted or not. כשהיה רבי עקיבא מגיע לפסוק זה היה בוכה. מה מי שהתכוון לאכול שומן ועלה בידו חלב, אמרה תורה ולא ידע והשם ונעשה עוונו. So Rabbi Akiva would cry also when he got to this pasuk, because this would be a case, for example, when someone intended to eat permitted fat. That's what he thought. He went to the fridge and he got a package out thinking it was permitted. Sure enough, it was, in fact, chelib, not permitted. So there's a case where he didn't know at the time, or he's still not sure, but it might have been, he took one of two packages and he's not sure which one it was. And so even though he didn't know and did not intend to, he intended to eat kosher, and maybe he ate non-kosher, and nevertheless it requires atonement. How much more will atonement be needed for someone who intends and actually does eat chaleb? Isi ben Yehuda Omer velo yada ve'Hashem v'nasa avono al davar zeh yidvu kol hadovim. And also on that pasuk, Isi ben Yehuda says regarding this, all sufferers shall grieve. In other words, if you want to have something to grieve about, think about this. That's not only intentional sin, and when the person actually goes through with it, but even if someone sins unintentionally, or if one intends to sin, but it doesn't end up being a sin. All of those permutations require atonement. Now, next thing in the Mishnah, mitached adam im imo, that a mother and a child, or a father and a child, are permitted to sleep in the same bed without clothes on until the children are of a certain age, only when they're young. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Aseh, mitached adam im achoto, v'dad im imo ve'im bito. Ki amaraha kamed Shmuel amar asul yitached im kol arayot shebatorah afilu im behema. So regarding these and other very close relations, generally people do not have a physical desire to their close family members. So based on that, Rav Aseh says a person is allowed to be secluded with his sister and can live also with his mother and with his daughter. Right? This is a family. It's very hard to be in a family if you won't be able to be in the house, let's say, with your own daughter when your wife goes out or something like that. For a mother to be living with her son, even when they're grown. So therefore, these are close relatives. This is a family, and a family is allowed to be secluded together, and we don't worry that it will come to anything. Ki amaraha kamed Shmuel amar asul yitached im kol arayot shebatorah afilu im behema. However, Shmuel disagreed with Rav Aseh and is more machmir and said, no person is allowed to be secluded with anyone who is prohibited too by arayot, even close family members, and even an animal. And even though with an animal, a vast majority of people have no desire, and we're not worried that it will come to anything, nevertheless, Shmuel says across the board ban, do not be in seclusion with any person or thing that is prohibited. Tenan. מתייחד אדם עם אמו ועם ביתו וישן עמהם בקירוב בשר ותיובתא דשמואל. Now we challenge Shmuel from our Mishnah that says one can be secluded with one's mother and daughter and can even sleep in the same bed as them, again, until a certain age, but one is allowed to be with them clothed even as adults. And so this is totally permitted, according to the Mishnah. There's a challenge to Shemuel that said all relationships are prohibited to have seclusion. Amar lecha Shemuel v'leta'ami chad etanya achoto v'chamoto ushar kol arayot shebatorah en mitachid imahem ela be'adim in shelo be'adim la. Shemuel says, yeah, you're right, that Mishnah is a challenge to me, but I have a beraita on my side. What are you going to do with this beraita that says someone, sister, and mother-in-law, and other prohibited relations in the Torah, a person cannot be secluded with them unless there are witnesses there. If there are witnesses, then they're not secluded. Then they're not in private. They're not secluded. So that we infer from that, if there are witnesses there, then it's permitted. But if there are no witnesses there, if they're really totally secluded and nobody around, then it would not be permitted, even with even it says sister and mother-in-law and so on, and all of them. So you see, this Baraita supports Mishemuel. What are you going to do with it? Ela Tanaehi. So in the end, it's actually a Machloket Tanaim. These Tomoraim are arguing along the lines of Machloket between Tanaim de Tanya. Amar Rabbi Meir, Hizaharu bi mipnei biti. Amar Rabbi Tarfon, Hizaharu bi mipnei kalati. Here's examples of a couple of Amoraim that were very stringent, like Shemuel. Rabbi Meir tells his colleagues, be careful with me regarding my daughter. In other words, please make sure I'm not secluded with my daughter. Obviously, Rabbi Meir would never sin, although we had Rabbi Meir before in one of the stories. You see this beautiful girl, Yesahara, across. And so, no one is ever above suspicion. And that was ended up being Satan. So Rabbi Meir, maybe he learned from that. He wants to be above suspicion no matter what, even with his own daughter. Not that anybody suspects he's going to have a sin, but he says, Yichud, just don't even put yourself in any possibly compromising situation. And Rabbi Tarfon says, make sure to be careful with me regarding my daughter-in-law. I don't want to be in secluded with her. Ligleg alav oto tamid. There was a student that was making fun of Rabbi Tarfon or Rabbi Meir and says, what kind of rabbis are this? That he's mocking them like, you're attracted to your daughter? You're attracted to your daughter-in-law, right? What's wrong with you? So the student was making fun. Amar Rabbi Abhu, Amar Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, lo yamim meotim ad shenichshal oto tamid bachamoto. And Rabbi Abhu says it was not many days before that student who was mocking the rabbi ended up sinning with his own mother-in-law. And again, the same lesson. Never think of yourself as being beyond reproach, beyond possibility of sinning. Always better to be careful. Afilu im behemad. The Mishnah said, Shemuel said, one should not be alone, secluded, even with an animal. Abaye machlele mikula dabra. And Abaye, in fact, did this, and he removed all the animals from the field when he was there, and if he was alone. Rav Sheshat ma'abar le masra. Rav Sheshat would put all the animals on the other side of the fence, make a mechitza, in order not to be secluded. Rav Chanan min ha'da'ikla de Rav Kahana Fum Nahara. Rav Chanan, who was from Nehar De'ah, once went to visit Rav Kahana in Pum Nahara. So he saw that the rabbi was sitting and studying, and there was an animal nearby, a goat or some whatever it is. And so the visitor, Rav Chanan, said, doesn't the master think that one should not be alone even with an animal? And I see you're studying here, there's nobody else around, and there's an animal right next to you. And Rav Chanan says, I didn't realize that it was here. Yeah, you're right. Okay, send it out. Right, it was just wandering around. Amar Rava, mitached adam im shete yevamot, ve'im shete sarot, im isha v'chamota, im isha ubat ba'ala, im isha v'yotinoket, sheyodat ta'am bi'ah, ve'en moseret asmah lebi'ah. Even though in the Mishnah we said one is not a man, is not allowed to be secluded with two women, but there are some exceptions. If you have two yevamot or two sarot, the second one's two co-wives, but let's say that guy dies without children, then those two sarot would both be yevamot, right? One of them has to do yibum or chalitza. Now these women generally hate each other. Also, isha v'chamota, a woman and her mother-in-law, someone who's not related to them, can be secluded with those two people. Because since they hate each other, if a man would come and sin with one, you can be sure that the other one would go and tell everybody about it, right? Because let's say two co-wives hate each other, and so they'd be more than happy to say, my other co-wife went and she committed adultery, she has to get divorced, or committed some incest. So since the man will know that the other person there is sure to report, so then he will be careful and not sin. Imisha ubat ba'ala, and similarly with a woman and her stepdaughter and stepmother also often have tension with each other. And finally, with a woman and a small child, a girl, who knows what biyah is, they understand sexuality, but don't have desire yet. for intercourse. So at that age, that person, if the man would sin with the adult woman in seclusion with that young girl, she would be likely to go and tell people about it, because this would be a surprising, curious, and maybe shameful experience for her, that she would then you wouldn't be able to explain it and get her to be quiet. Whereas to adults, the man might be able to somehow get the other person to be quiet. So in any of these cases where it's very likely that one of the women would tell on the other one if they had relations with the man, so then there is no problem of yichud. Higdilu zeyashen bichsuto. The Mishnah continued and taught that a mother and son, or father and daughter, even though once they become of a certain age, they're not allowed to be in a bed together without clothes on. However, they are allowed to be together with clothes on. They can even sleep on the same mattress, under the same covers, as long as they are clothed. So v'chule v'chama. The Gemara asks, how old is that? How old would that be required that they have to be clothed? Amar Rav Ada bar Aza, Amar Rav Aseh tinoket bat tesha shanim v'yom echad tinok ben shetem asre v'yom echad. So Rav Aseh says, for a girl, it would be 9 years and 1 day, and for a boy, it's 12 years and 1 day. And there's another version of the statement that says for a girl it's 12 years and 1 day, and for a boy 13 years and 1 day. And really the two versions are not arguing, but rather it depends on the person. It's whenever they reach puberty and they are already physically developed. So once there's that physical development, then it's already inappropriate for a parent to be with that and child to be sleeping in the same bed unclothed. Amar Rav Rafram bar Papa Amar Rav Chista Lo shenu ela shena bosha la'amod lefanav arum ava bosha la'amod lefanav arum asur mai tama yeser al besha. Rav Chista says there's even a further limitation, that it's only permitted, in other words, even before puberty, it's only permitted if the girl is so young that she's not embarrassed to stand before her father naked. But if she's already embarrassed, right, and this could be well before she has physical signs. I mean, a 2-3-year-old girl doesn't feel any embarrassment, but once she's a little older, she will feel embarrassment, and then already that makes it prohibited. Why? Because the embarrassment means that the inclination has already taken hold upon her. In other words, the embarrassment of being naked comes together with the thought of even the possibility of being a sexual object, the possibility of being together with the person, which is therefore already just even the thought of the possibility of a thought is already makes it prohibited for them to be together without clothes on. Rav Acha bar Abba Ikla lebe Rav Chista Hataneh. Rav Acha bar Abba once went to Rav Chista, his son-in-law. He went to his son-in-law's house. Shekaleh lebar berate otabuha bechnafeh. Rav Acha, the father-in-law, takes his granddaughter and places her upon his lap. She's probably about 11 years old. Amar le lo sabala mor de mekdesha. And so Rav Chista, the father of this girl, tells his father-in-law, why are you taking her on your lap? Why don't you consider, how come you're not considering the possibility that maybe she is mikudeshet, maybe I married her off to another guy? The idea being that if she's a single girl on 11, okay, then it would be appropriate, could be appropriate to have her on your lap. But if she's already engaged to be with a man, then you have to treat her differently. And so how come you're not considering that possibility? Amar le avarta lach ad Rav, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Itema Rabbi Elazar, Asur le'adam shekadesh et pito keshi ketana, ad shetagdiv tomar bifloni ani rosa. And so Rav Acha, the grandfather of the girl, says to his son-in-law, no, I don't think it's possible that you married her off, because would you violate the statement that Rav said. After all, Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav, and some say it's to be Elazar, that one is prohibited from marrying off his daughter while she is still a minor. Rather, she should grow up and say, I want to marry this guy. When she's a minor, she doesn't have the possibility of choosing for herself whether she likes this guy or not. She's too young to discern, and her father can marry her off against her will. So even though legally a father can do that, Rav said it's prohibited because it's not right. So I'm sure you didn't violate the statement of Rav, and therefore, no, I assume that she is still single. Rav Chisda then replied to that against his father-in-law. There seems to be some tension here between the father-in-law and the son-in-law. And he says, Master, you, my father-in-law, Ravacha, you seem to violate what Shemuel says, because Shemuel says one should not make use of a woman. Generally, like to do something in an intimate way. You shouldn't ask a woman to pour water for you or wash your feet. These are things that are intimate that a wife would do, but that you shouldn't ask someone who's not married to you to do. And so putting this girl on your lap is a somewhat intimate gesture and inappropriate. So you violate Shemuel. Amar le ana ki idach Shemuel siberali de amar Shemuel hakol l'shem shamayim. And the father-in-law says, I'm following the other thing that Shemuel says. Yes, you're right. Shemuel did say one should not make use of a woman and act in an intimate way with someone. However, Shemuel also says that anything that's l'shem shamayim is permitted. In other words, if you don't have intention that this should be an intimate act, and you're doing it just l'shem shamayim to show affection for your granddaughter, that's a normal thing to do. That's l'shem shamayim. I had nothing, no ill intention in mind, and therefore it's permitted. So you see. So we see through this discussion that the rabbis have a very fine-tuned sense of precisely where to draw the line between what is normal family interactions and what can lead towards inappropriate and illegal activity. And this is a very fine line that requires a lot of judgment. And too much extreme one way or too much extreme the other way is not good. But having the proper guidelines and adding safeguards to make sure that even things that seem like, oh, that would never happen, having safeguards to make sure that one is always above reproach and have any possibility of sin are always helpful to keep us on the straight and narrow. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.